virtualization environment you're using, whether it's Proxmox or VirtualBox. You've got a couple of options there. I don't have one free yet for VMware, just because, well, I think it's Broadcom and licensing, and I'm just not going to pay for it. Not when there's open source tools that do the same thing equally as well. And so basically where I'm going with this is by the just pirate it. Yeah, says the person in the ethical hacking server. Yeah. Anyway, but whether you choose to follow along Proxmox or virtual, if you follow along at all, there's basically, with this 80 lab I have now, I've got it set up so that let me just pull up I'll pull up the Proxmox lab just because that's the one I use the most. But if you look at the steps here, what we're doing in the lab, and this is the same for the VirtualBox lab here, but we'll skip down to the steps in the series, is that we go through the process of setting up in our home lab the Active Directory forest. So I show you how to set up the forest, including a DNS server, DHCP server, a couple of users, a domain admin, and then this portion right here, again, it's the same titling in the VirtualBox side as well. This is your internal methodology. So if you follow along with this article here, it's going to show you how to make the Active Directory lab vulnerable using a script that's been pretty widely used on GitHub. But it's pretty simple. You just run the script and it creates some vulnerable things in your Active Directory lab. And then if you follow along with the guide, it goes through a whole bunch of internal methodology that you can test. And then this lab here, which is what we'll be covering today, is a pivoting lab or an external pen test practice. So we'll take a quick look at the diagram here just to kind of just to get you guys situated with what I'm going to be reviewing today. Is the way I have my lab set up in VirtualBox or Proxmox is the Kali VM is sitting on the LAN, which is like the 10.0.0/24 network. Then there's an isolated network, and then an AD lab, which is again all covered in the series. And then what we do in this particular guide is I show you how to take one of the VulnHub boxes that I've in my lab guides. I use Mr. Robot and Metasploitable 2 as a couple of examples of importing VulnHub boxes into your home lab. In this particular guide, uses Metasploitable 2 as the vulnerable target. And so what we do is we set up some firewall rules so that we make it harder for ourselves to cheat. And we firewall off the traffic from Kali. Kali cannot reach the AD lab here. It's just a way to keep ourselves accountable so we don't feel compelled to try to cheat there. And then after we do that, we look at the process of setting up the Metasploitable 2 VM with a couple of network interfaces. So I got to re-reference the diagram up here. Sorry to keep scrolling up and down. But you'll see in the diagram here, instead of having one interface where Metasploitable 2 would typically just be right here in this isolated subnet, what we're doing is we're giving Metasploitable 2 two interfaces, one home here and one home here, and then if you look at basically we're setting up, we're configuring the network interfaces file so that it gets an DHCP address from the isolated subnet and one from the Active Directory subnet. We restart it, and then you'll see here in the network configuration that now Metasploitable 2 has two network interfaces with 10.9.9 being isolated and 80.80 being the AD lab. So the idea being that you'll scan from Kali or whatever, whether it's Parrot or Kali or custom builds, but your attack VM, you'll be scanning the isolated port. You'll be getting your reverse shell back here. And then you'll be setting up a pivot so that this box does the routing for you into the 80 lab. And that's essentially what the network, what your external penetration testing is going to look like. Is you'll be using this, these are all private IP addresses, but conceptually it's the same. If you had a web server with a public IP, and this web server had additional access to some internal subnets, it's the same methodology. You'll be using this guy as a pivot point into additional areas of the network. So we'll talk about the scope really quickly. I'm just going to walk through this lab with you guys here, and we're going to look at different commands that I'm running. I think last time when we met last time as a group, and when I was presenting, we were talking a lot about internal methodology, and I was talking. I did do some review on the external portions. Actually, I take that back. That was two sessions ago when I was presenting. That first one was an external, and then it was an internal. So we've seen the external. If you've been on the call on the session with me, or you went back and watched on YouTube on Sean's YouTube, you've seen the external methodology. But in that particular session, I was more heavily focused on the exploit chain, and you can go back and watch that. I think if Sean would be kind enough to, or somebody, if you have the link handy, I can try and grab it later and paste it in the chat later. But if somebody wants to grab the link to that initial external we were doing,
I'll grab that right now.
Yeah, thank you. You can watch it later, and that goes through the exploit chain, which is what I'm not going to focus on today. I'm not going to focus on pivoting into domain admin. The intent of the session today is to more focus on that initial enumeration, the OSINT, and then focus on pivoting itself, because I did show pivoting in that first session,
Few of these,
but I didn't really get a chance to go into it more technically. And I didn't really get a chance to talk about what the rhyme or reason is for some specific commands you'd run through a pivot, or some specific options you'd use. So let's go ahead and get to work here. So much like something you'd receive on a external pen test is you're setting your scope of the pen test. And you would also give the client your IP that you'd be coming from, and then you'd be discussing time frames of the pen test, when you'll be delivering the report, things like that. And then you'll also discuss with the client about what the potential scope would be. And here, the scope of this pen test is the external server, the 10.99.114. This would be a public web server, and then you exploit this server to then reach this subnet, and this entire subnet is in scope. So that is the internal domain for this 80.lab. All right, so we're going to go ahead and kick off that port scan. And I'm just going to blaze through it real quick, because I don't want to waste the time waiting for the port scan to finish, because I already have the port scan results in the right up here. So as I discussed in the blog here, if you look at the Metasploit, and again, remind you, this is Metasploitable 2. If you look at the port scan results, you can see that the attack surface is pretty massive, but we're just going to go for some low-hanging fruit today, because, again, I want to talk about that initial OSINT and getting that reverse shell. So the initial OSINT, a lot of people, I think, tend to overthink this quite a bit, but you have to remember, as I've talked about in my previous 80 sessions, the most critical thing to Active Directory methodology and I guess the core concept to Active Directory in general are usernames and identities. So when you're doing that initial OSINT, trying to find places, for trying to find usernames and places to authenticate, you need to look at the target comprehensively, and you need to stay in scope as well. So, you don't want to go hunting around on websites and servers that are way out of scope and doing things you shouldn't be doing. So, point being, when you're doing that initial OSINT, make sure that you're finding those usernames and information about the domain in ways that are not going to get you in trouble or get you going out of scope. So nothing wrong with crawling a web page, just clicking around looking for usernames, but you don't want to do, you don't want to. It's a fine line between, like looking for DNS records, just through a couple clicks or a couple commands, you know, there's also a fine line between clicking links and just crawling around on a website like a normal user would. But then if you start using things like Cool or other word list generators where you're spamming the different servers on the internet with word list generators, you don't want to do that. You want to be very careful about where you target your tools at. So what I'd recommend initially is just take that happy path, go on any websites that are affiliated with the domain that's in scope. And we don't have a domain on the public web server here. I don't have one in this example, but we could just go to HTTP 10.9.9.104. And this is not a great example because I haven't set up an OSINT lab for this example or for this session today. I mean, that's what Angela is going to be going over in the next session. But the point being is that you would want to visit this website here, and you'd want to start clicking around and just making a catalog of any usernames that you come across. So in my my internal domain is ad.lab. So what I would want to do from the scope, from the perspective of this pen test, I'd want to start clicking around on this web page, or any sub pages, any directories, any links that I can find on here. I'd want to start clicking around and looking for usernames, and you could look in. It's usually probably it's a little more CTF-y, but you could look in the source code for usernames in the comments. You could click around in different pages looking for usernames, but the primary goal here is you want to try to collect usernames, emails, anything related to users on that internal domain here, and you want to start putting them in a list. So you compile your set of usernames, and as you're clicking around gathering usernames, and you've been pretty thorough, and you can't think of anywhere else to start. You can't think of anywhere else to enumerate usernames. You think you've got a pretty strong list. Now is the time to start spraying credentials at those at services. So if we look at the attack surface for Metasploitable 2 here, we see FTP, but we could try anonymous log, and we can see it's allowed here. But again, don't assume anything. Assumptions will get you nowhere. So you just look at your network services, approach the target comprehensively. Don't just focus. A lot of people get stuck on there has to be a way to get a shell on port 80 or port 443. Like, this is I have to get my shell through some vulnerable web app. That's not necessarily the case. You need to look at the target comprehensively. Where could you spray credentials? At the target. FTP, Hydra has an FTP module. I think Fluff might have one. There's SSH. SSH is not typically a great place to spray credential, or is not a great place for exploits, but it may be a place to spray credentials. You're not going to find too many vulnerabilities to get a reverse shell through SSH, but it might not hurt you to spray some credentials at SSH. You could try again at FTP. Here's Port 80, if you found a login page on port 80, which, just like, for example, you're clicking around, click, 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 and here's our login page. Yes, you would want to spray credentials here. You could spray them at FTP, SSH. Where else could we spray them? Here's SMB. We could spray them at SMB. SQL Server. Where else? If there was, I don't see one on here. Trying to see if there's IMAP or POP3. I don't see any mailboxes, but if there was IMAP or POP3 on here, you could also try to see if you can map a mailbox with a credential. Point being that don't get tunnel vision on just one protocol. Look at your target at different places you can spray credentials with those usernames that you've collected. So you could say you had in your usernames list, you had like john.doe at, and again, I'm at 80.lab, whatever the internal domain is for your target, just keep that in mind. But you might have john.doe 80.lab, chain.doe, other usernames that you've come up with, and then you'd want to say Hydra, this is my particular switches that I use, and the usernames list would be usernames.text, and that's the list of usernames that you got, and then passwords you could spray a RockU or whatever at the target services, and then you could say SSH 10.9.9.114 and just see what sticks. If nothing sticks there, then try FTP. If nothing sticks there, try other services, try other protocols. And again, just make sure that you're doing a very thorough job of collecting usernames from any particular point you see them. Make good use of your Control F key, and you could search for keyword 80.lab here. Look, sometimes you'll see in the footer of the page, like web admin is, admin at 80.lab. Or again, just look everywhere you can see to grab usernames and compile them in a list and spray them at different services. And it's all about chaining those exploits. So if you're successful about spraying credentials at services, that may not get you your reverse shell. You may not immediately get a shell, but you may be able to map a mailbox or an FTP folder or an SMB share, and that may give you more information to continue to use consecutively. So you may have, if you can brute force into FTP, maybe there's a credentials file in there, or maybe the SMB share contains a PDF with some additional usernames and information that you can throw in a list to continue to brute force. You need to be thinking the long game here. You're not always going to get an instant shell. It's not always instant reward. Sometimes they're incremental gains, and you enumerate, you spray, you get lucky, and then you continue this process of enumerating and finding additional avenues in until maybe you find something like, a user password in a file, or maybe it's an FTP, or maybe it's an archive, or rather a zip archive that's been password protected, and then you need to zip to John that thing, file dot zip, and that throws a hash out, and then you try and crack that with John the Ripper. So then you open the zip archive with your password that you just cracked, and then you find more information. This is how it's typically going to go. Sometimes you get easy wins, but in most cases, you're going to need to think holistically about the service. So don't get tunnel vision on one specific service. That's the key takeaway here, is that if you think you've exhausted all your options, think about what information have I collected and how can I use that to possibly get into other services to find even more information. That's the key takeaway from what I'm trying to explain to you, is that you need to be thinking about the target holistically. So moving on with the guide here, we're going to skip forward here and imagine for a second that we've found the username and password for this particular web service here. Through the process of enumeration, now we know how to log in to this particular website here. And because it's DVWA, we'll just pretend that this particular website that the client has protected behind a login is vulnerable to command execution. We can see it's a ping application. We can look, if it's a gray box pen test, maybe they've given us source code and we can look at it and see that, oh, okay, they're not sanitizing their input, and we can chain commands in here with a semicolon. Just in the same way, like on a command line here, we can say, ping 10.999.114. We'll just say ping C1, and then we'll say who am I? And what are we doing here? We're just chaining commands. And you see, here's the ping output, and here's the who am I output. And that's how we're going to abuse this vulnerability here. And we're just going to say the client application does not sanitize user input. We're going to go ahead and get a shell. And as I show in the right up here, this particular shell exec command returns output to the user interface here. So it's really handy. We can look at the NC output. We can see that the version of netcat installed on this box allows the E flag to be specified, so we can get an easier reverse shell with this. So we'll go ahead and set up our listener here. Kill my hack the box VPN real quick. Okay. So we'll say RL rep, and we're going to listen on port 443, and then here we'll say here we're going to say I want the web app to ping 127.0.0.1, and then we're going to chain with semicolon and call back to our listener with a reverse shell. It may take a moment for that ping command to finish running there. See if I may have, firewall rule I added. Hang on, I got to go back and edit this firewall rule here. That firewall rule I added to Metasploit is screwing that up. Give me just a minute here. Okay, actually, I'm looking at it. Seems like it's okay. Let me try this one more time. Yeah. So things aren't going to work for me. Classic. All right. Let me open up a shell on the Metasploitable box here and see if we can figure out why It wants to be difficult. Okay, probably that route here. So hang on just a moment. Let me try restarting the networking stack. See if that fixes anything here. Try to ping back on my Kali box, and if it doesn't work, yeah, it's not going to work. So that's why you don't change things before presentation day. Try this now. See if it works. Yeah, works now. Okay. So, all right. Now it should work. See if I get a reverse shell now. Is my listener up? Yes. There we go. Okay. So we got our reverse shell. Shuffle these around here. Okay. So moving down with the presentation here, we have our reverse shell. Let's see. We are indeed www data as shown in the screenshot. So now that we have our reverse shell, let's just recall how we got here. So we did some initial OSINT. We found a bunch of usernames. We sprayed them around, found some info that got us a login to that web page. Once we got logged in, we found some additional endpoints on the web app that had some vulnerabilities that allowed us to gain command execution through a vulnerable web application. So that's your OSINT to initial foothold chain there. OSINT, spray around, gather info, log in, find more vulnerabilities, get a reverse shell. In a nutshell. Now that we're on the box, we want to begin combing around for additional information. If we look at the IP route command from the box here, we'll see that it has access. This, as we're doing that post exploit enumeration, one of the commands we'll be running, as I can show you in my, I have a my CTF methodology article here as well that kind of covers what I do post exploit in the privilege escalation process. But one of them, so among the commands that I'm running, I'm looking at, what operating system, what kernel, who am I as a current user, what are my privileges, what other users are on the box, what other groups are on the box, and then where we're at right now, we're looking at network interfaces and routes. So again, you can see here if we're pivoting to other hosts, and we are, things we can look at are the routing table. So look at the look at the network interfaces. We see IP address or IPA. We see two interfaces, which is really interesting. We see the IP address here that we just attacked, that we just came in on, but we also see it's dual homed and has an IP on 1080.80.11. So we would definitely be very interested in that since we're looking to pivot here. We could look at other open ports. For possibly for privilege escalation, there may be some additional internal services running here that we could find a way to get system admin or root on this box. We're going to look at routes, IP route, and we see that it has access to both routes, the one we came in on and this additional route here. We could ping sweep from the box, but I'm going to show you some additional things to try on the box that'll probably save you some time and be a lot more robust and effective. Again, we're not going to cover this right now, but just to show you, like, if our goal is to gain root on the box, we'll want to look at interesting processes that are running, services, perhaps scheduled tasks, maybe interesting files of the box that have a password or some other configuration at present. But if the goal is to gain root or system admin, then yeah, we'll be doing this enumeration, but we're going to skip that again in the interest of time. So we'll just say, as part of our post-exploit enumeration, we're digging around in the box. Let me get a TTY on this thing too. All right. And we're just digging around the box looking for privilege escalation. I'm going to skip. I'm going to fast forward. We magically found some SUID files, and Nmap is among them here. And if you look at either I'm blind right now or here it is. Yeah, Nmap is among them. If you look at the GTFO bins article, you can see a quick and easy way to get a root shell with that SUID bin. You can see we're affected. The EU ID is root, so we can run things as root. So now what we're going to do, since we have root privilege, we're going to go ahead and drop a public key string into the system administrator's SSH session. Again, I'm kind of skipping through this as well because, hey, it's all documented on my site. If you want to go back through the lab, feel free to do so in your own time. Again, we're going to skip through some of the stuff in the interest of time. So on Kali, we see run on your Kali Linux host to generate an SSH key pair. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a clean slate here. All right. And so now if we do an ls, we'll see we have a public key file and a private key file. Here I say we're going to go ahead and copy the entire public key string to your clipboard. And again, what we're doing here is we're setting up persistence on the box so that we can SSH back into the box anytime with our private key file, unless the blue team are smart and they figure out that we've if they figure out that we've added our private key, our public key string to the system administrator's authorized host file or authorized keys file, then yeah, they can strip the access from us. But for now, we're going to go ahead and copy this entire file. We're going to run in your reverse shell and add your public key string. So you can see the end of that command is cut off over here. We're going to append double angle bracket. We're going to append to MSF admin's authorized keys. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to say echo, close the quote, and we'll say angle. We'll say home, MSF admin.sh authorized keys. And if we look at the authorized keys file, I've already got another one in there. You can see they start with the SSH RSA line. The last one we've added in here is this one right here. That's the most recent one we've added in. All right, so we'll go ahead and say let's test out our key file. So we'll say SSH. I do have to specify some options here with this command. Again, I say, as you can see in the comments, the Metasploitable 2 box is very old, so we have to enable some ciphers. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But we'll just say that, and we'll see if it'll Let us in. I'm sorry, I have the wrong host there. Here we go. Just to figure that out. All right. So we'll say ID, who am I, and IPA. So we're on the box now. So now we have persistence on the box. We have a way to get back into the host if we lose a connection. This is also really convenient because this SSH key can be used to set up some port forwards and proxies, and that's exactly where we're going next. All right. So let's go ahead and skip down here. Oh, and I cover this in my guide as well. If we try to run clear from the SSH session, we can just say passport term equals Linux and then clear it out. Just because, again, due to the age of the box, this terminal type is not known. All right. So now we'll talk about setting up the proxy. So we'll go ahead and open up my notes here, and we'll talk about setting up a SOCKS proxy with SSH. The only thing I want to point out here is this yellow note here, and that I'm really bummed about, that I wish I had more time to show on another vulnerable host, but I just don't have it set up at the moment. But again, Metasploitable 2 it's an old box, and Chisel will not run on there just because I want to say because it's probably written with some newer libraries in Go that aren't supported on this box, even if you use a 32-bit binary. I just could not get Chisel to run on this target. It is a 32-bit kernel, i686. That is a 32-bit kernel. And I did try a 32-bit binary with Chisel, and I just simply couldn't get it to run. So I won't be able to show you Chisel port forwarding, but it's not conceptually that much different. It's just that with Chisel, you've got a client application and a server application, much like SSH. It's just with SSH, as we've already witnessed here, SSH is already running on this target. We don't need an extra binary. We can take advantage of, and this is actually much better for living off the land, is the fact that we don't need to transfer an extra binary to the target. We can take advantage of the fact that SSH is already running on this target and use that as a way to get a proxy on this host. So we'll take a look at the kind of proxy we want to set up. Again, we're going to do a forward SOCKS4 proxy over SSH, and we'll look at this diagram here to make more sense of that. I'm showing you. Sorry, I'm showing you the Chisel documentation. Hang on. We'll do the SSH port forward, and we'll go to forward dynamic SOCKS proxy. And so what we're doing here in this case, if you look at the traffic flow, is we are connecting over SSH to the target, and we're using this SSH tunnel to send and receive traffic with remote networks over here, or a remote host. And what this command here does is using the F and D flags here. We can look at man SSH to tell you more what those mean, but we're going to open up a proxy, a SOCKS4 proxy on 127 localhost on Kali on a specified port. So we're going to, any traffic that we send down through this socket is going to go through the SSH tunnel, come out the other side of this SSH session, and it is now up to this box to route the traffic to its destination. So again, hang on, sorry. If we look at IP routes on this host, effectively, whatever is in this routing table that's controlling the flow of this traffic. When it's coming through the proxy out the other side of the SSH session, and it's the same with Chisel. If you do a SOCKS proxy with Chisel, it's the exact same thing, and I can show you in just a minute. But you come through this socket, go through the SSH tunnel right here, come out the other side. This box right here is basically, it's not a router, but it's acting as a router. It's a SOCKS proxy. It's routing TCP and UDP traffic. Actually, not TCP traffic. UDP doesn't go through SOCKS 4, but anyhow, this box is responsible for getting your packets to and from the destinations that you specified. So what would happen if you said go to google.com and send it through our proxy? Then this host would be responsible for getting those packets to google.com and coming back out. Conversely, if the scope of this pen test is we're trying to get 1080/80/24 through this proxy, does this host have 1080/80/24 in its routing table? It certainly does, right here. So this box can and will get your packets to the appropriate place. If you said 10.80.81.0, then there's no route. This box doesn't have a route there, so it's not going to be able to help you with that. All right. And just to show you that it's conceptually the same thing in Chisel. If we look at Chisel's forward dynamic SOCKS proxy example, the traffic flow is the same. If we look at the network diagram, what Chisel does here is we run the Chisel's server on the target. We connect and make an HTTP WebSocket, and then through that WebSocket, we establish an SSH tunnel to the target. And here's that socket I was talking about before. The traffic is going to go out the socket, through the tunnel, to the other side. This is our box, the target box, and then this box is going to figure out if it can or cannot get your packets to the appropriate destination. That's pivoting, and that's proxy pivoting in a nutshell. This is SOCKS proxying. This is not the same as doing individual port forwarding. It's different, but because we're interested, the reason we use a SOCKS proxy rather than port forwards, like these individual port forwards, for example, the reason we use a SOCKS proxy is because we want to communicate with a multitude of hosts on the other side of the server. So we want to be able to just specify a proxy one time, go through the tunnel, and hit as many hosts as we possibly can on the other side. That's why you use a SOCKS proxy, is that you can hit multiple targets. As long as this box right here has the ability to route them, that's all we care about. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we'll show a proof of concept here, and we'll just prove before and after that our proxy is working. All right. So if we look at the command and you ignore this option and this option, these are just there because of the age of the box. We're just going to totally ignore those options, and we're going to specify specifically on F and D. We'll look at man SSH, and we'll look at F. We'll see F. Requests SSH to go to the background just before command execution. So basically, we're just daemonizing it. We're saying, just before we set up we'll set up the tunnel, and when everything's all set up, go to the background. slash we'll do -n. Do not execute a remote command. So again, we're just setting up a socket. Don't do anything through the SSH tunnel. Just set up the socket. This is useful for forwarding ports. Set up the socket and don't do anything else. And D. We have our bind address, which is in this case localhost, and the port, and a local dynamic application level port forwarding. Again, without going too much into details, dynamic being we just send traffic to this proxy port, and it's going to go through the proxy dynamically out the other side and figure out how to get it to its destination. That's the meat. That's the meat of this command right here. That is SSH port forwarding. Without these options here, especially this one, the /D, you're not that is your port forwarding magic right here. This is our private key file to authenticate to the box as this user. A little bit complicated, I know. It's not one of those things that you just memorize overnight, or maybe some of you are just old pros at this, like you're totally comfortable with this. Then that's great. If you're not, you're going to get better at it with practice. But let's go ahead and prove that our proxy is working here, or that our proxy works with a before and after. All right, so we're going to go ahead and set up the port forward. Oops. I need to get back my other window here, right? Let me blow this one up and we'll make it a little bigger. All right, and now we can run this next command. We can do sudo netstat and see if that port is truly listening. And it is, and you can see it's associated with the SSH port. So now our proxy port is listening and ready for connections to send it out the other side of the SSH tunnel. All right, it's listening and ready. Now we need to add it to our proxy chains configuration. And you can see I've already done so in mine. And we want to specify SOCKS 4 here and not SOCKS 5 because with SSH, it's SOCKS 4. With Chisel, you want to specify SOCKS 5. There's a difference in the protocol version that's pretty dramatic, so you want to make sure you specify appropriately. All right, and now we're gonna prove that our proxy is working by running these two commands back to back. So first, I'm gonna say crack map exec just from Kali. If we look at my Kali routing table, it's pretty bare bones. I've just got my default route. There's no reference in here whatsoever to 10.80.80/24. So if I run this command, I should get nothing back. Oh, you know what that is? That is me. I didn't firewall that off. Hang on one second. Let me go back to LAN. And I should have firewalled that off. Oh, that's my DNS. Hang on, I know what that is. But anyway, let me see if crack map exec. So the option to disable DNS. I'm not sure if there is. There might not be. Let's see. Ping 1080. Weird. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong firewall. Okay, here we go. What I'll do is I'll just set up a quick rule real quick. Sorry about that, guys. Make sure. EDLab subnets. Let's see here. All right, now let's see if I can ping it now. I shouldn't be able to. Let's see. Let me try it up here. There we go. Okay, now I'll be able to prove to you that I have no connection whatsoever to that subnet. You can see it's timing out. The connections are timing out now. So we have no access to that subnet. So now we can prove that our proxy is working by running proxy chains. We can just append proxy chains queue. And there we go. So now the difference here is that we're going through. We're going through 127.0.0.1.580.80. Looking at the network diagram, we're going through that socket, coming out the other side of the SSH tunnel to reach the remote networks. That's the key difference here, is that we are effectively using our proxy. Okay. And looking at it here, there's already some useful information when we crack map exec through our proxy here, because we're able to get the NetBIOS names from those hosts over SMB. We actually already see the domain controller. So this would be a really great time to go ahead and put that domain controller IP into your etc host file. So we'll say, okay, we'll add that in, because we'll need that for some commands. We'll need to have the fully qualified domain name of the domain controller for some commands. So we'll talk about, now that we've set up our proxy, how do we port scan through the proxy? When you're running through proxy chains or any other SOX proxy, you need to use the slash or the -S capital T flag when you're doing port scans through a proxy, because if you use half open stealth, quote unquote, stealth scan, it's not going to work through the proxy because the proxy can't track the connections. So an example of this we'll go ahead and set up some Nmap targets. Since when we ran crackmap exec, we have a list of targets that we got through the crackmap exec output. And we'll go ahead and put them into a targets list. And pointing out here, with our Nmap scan, we want to run PN, capital PN. Don't do ping checks, because ping checks don't work through a proxy. You don't want to have ping checks on through proxy. ST, you want full TCP connects due to proxy again. We're going to do top ports, because if you try to do all 65,535 ports through a proxy, it's going to take very long. And then T4 is a reasonable speed through the proxy, and this is our input list containing this list here. Again, we're not going to do that right now because I don't want to keep you guys waiting. I already have the output in the write up here of the top 5,000 port scan of these different hosts through the proxy. Your other port scanning options are, is the Nmap binary installed on the proxy itself? And if we look at Metasploit 2, it is. We can say, oops. It is. So your other option is, instead of port scanning through your proxy, which can take very long, you could just port scan from here. So you can, and again, because Metasploitable 2 is very old, you might have some different options on here. In this example, I'm just showing you here how to do a host discovery. This is just basically an ARP scan. So we can say which hosts are up on the network, and you can see there's actually a good bit of difference than what we found through PragMap exec, because we have a .9 here. .11 is Metasploitable 2, so you want to ignore that host. So what you can do now that we have a list, if we say cat live hosts, you see we have host 10.80.81 appears to be up. We can see the keyword here appears to be up or repeats across multiple hosts here, so we can just use that as a filter. grep4 appears to be up in this file, and then we're going to make a list of IPs effectively. So cat port scan targets, and there's our list of IPs to scan. And again, you could run a port scan that way. So all I'm trying to show you is you have options for port scanning. You can port scan through the proxy, or you can see if Nmap's installed locally on the proxy. You can use it there. What if Nmap isn't installed on the proxy? I'm not going to go through this now, but in this example, I show you how to use Kali as a means to get back out to the internet from Metasploitable 2. But we're not going to cover that now. If you were on say Metasploitable 2, I don't think it should have internet access. It doesn't have internet access, right? I can't ping google.com. I'll hear you guys. We'll just do this. We'll just glaze over it real quick. But I'm going to run this sh command to create this reverse sh tunnel. Okay. Wrong host. I need to do 10.9.9.4. All right. And now I can show you, for example, if we do curl https google.com. Looks like I do have internet access. Not sure why. Google.com. Oh, now it wants to work. Okay, well, I lied, but at any rate, running this reverse sh tunnel is a means for you to get internet access out to if you want to install things through Kali as an internet proxy. So we'll look at some additional attacks right quick, just through the proxy. So we can see how would you do anonymous LDAP queries through your proxy? You just, instead of running LDAP search, you just tack on proxy chains -q here. So just as a demonstration, we'll take off the proxy chains queue just to show you it's not going to work. Connection's going to time out. Now it works with proxy chains queue. And again, I'll refer you back to the diagram. We're going through the proxy out the other side to the domain controller and running that LDAP lookup to grab a list of usernames. And then we'll take those usernames and we'll use them to ASREP roast through the proxy. So we'll cat temp usernames.text. Here's our list of usernames. Now let's go ahead and ASREP roast through the proxy. Again, just to demonstrate here that it is not working. If we take off our proxy chains queue, it's not going to work. But if we tack on proxy chains queue, we immediately see results and we get some ASREP roastable usernames here, or one rather, with Joan. We can take Joan's hash and echo that out to hash.text. And we can, I need to change that location for RockU. We can crack it. It's Madison. and we could take that credential and run Bloodhound Python through the proxy. And again, I want to refer you here to some of the comments. We have, when we're going through proxy chains, just remember that some protocols, like DNS, they work over UDP typically. DNS lookups usually go over UDP, and DNS zone transfers go over TCP. But since we can't send UDP through the proxy, we're going to say use TCP for your lookups by specifying this flag. We're going to use fake time to do an NTP sync with the domain controller so that we can Kerberos authenticate. And then we're going to do our Bloodhound requests, okay? So we'll go ahead and... Oops, sorry. Try grabbing that command one more time. Not sure why. Oh, you know what? It should work. Sure, if seems like it didn't do the... I see this clock skew to great error would indicate that the NTP sync with the domain controller didn't work for some reason. I'm not sure why that's not going through the proxy. Let me double check. I don't think it's case sensitive, but let me try taking that out of there. Add a duplicate. I don't think that's going to affect anything, but yeah, it was working earlier in my lab, and I'm not sure if maybe a firewall introduced in there is causing some issues. But at any rate, if we list here, we can see an array of JSON files that we could feed into Bloodhound for further analysis. And finally, last command before I wrap up is I'm going to show you how to RDP session through the proxy. So you have two options. You can use proxy chains, or you can just use the built-in proxy switch with X-free RDP. I just use the built-in proxy switch just because I tend to think that the built-in features are going to work a little bit faster than using proxy chains. But they're both pretty comparable. So we'll go ahead and run this command and see that we've successfully got an RDP session on 10.80.80.3 as sorry, that was Joan Hester. Okay, so that's how you, if you wanted to, I'll just show you as an example, just to prove you I'm not full of shit. You can just knock off this this proxy option here, do proxy chains queue, and so you can do it either way. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you're going through your socket to get to the remote network. Just a few wrapping up here. Again, I go through in much more detail in the Hack Your AD Lab internal article about different attacks. The key difference being that in that guide, Kali is on the same network as the rest of the AD infrastructure. So Kali is on 10.80.80.0/24. In this example, Kali is not. Kali is pivoting through a proxy box. Again, I'll show you just as a as a matter of proof. I mean, I think I cover a pretty extensive attack surface with the internal, which would cover enumerating the domain, credential spraying, Kerberos, LM and R poisoning, a ton of attacks. not nearly enough article space or time where I could cover every single attack, but a lot of them are covered here. The point being that the key difference between this internal methodology and the external methodology is that you're going through a proxy, so you're just going to be using proxy chains for predominantly for the most of your attacks to get to AD. That's the primary difference. So if you go here and you look at something like ADI DNS, this command is being run internal. So there's no mention of proxy chains. There's no mention of using proxy. But how would you use that through a proxy? You would just tack on proxy chains-q. I think there's a DNS TCP flag for that. Yeah, right here in my notes, DNS TCP flag. All right. So the key point being is they're pretty much the same commands with two exceptions. You're not in this command's not featuring proxy chains-q, and it's not featuring the DNS TCP flag. But most of the attacks by and large are the same. The other consideration here is that some attacks don't work through a proxy. For example, LLM&R poisoning, man-in-the-middle IPv6 takeover, SMB relay, ARP poisoning, just about any other poisoning or layer 2 attack is not going to work just by virtue of the fact that you're going through a proxy. You don't have direct access to this local area network. If you wanted to run these poisoning attacks, you need to transfer those tools to an internal host. You can't run them from Kali through your proxy. It's not possible from a TCP/IP networking standpoint. You just can't do it. Some exceptions to proxy chains, as I demonstrated before, where X4RDP has that proxy switch. Curl also has a SOCKS 4 proxy switch or SOCKS 5. Hydra has the Hydra proxy environment variable. So you can use proxy chains-q. Some tools don't play nice with proxy chains, so you might need to see if they have a proxy switch of some kind like this. Just keep that in mind when you're playing with proxy chains. Some tools don't play nice with it. And just check the documentation and see if there's a way to proxy the tool through a SOCKS proxy. Additional attacks, again, as I linked before, hack your whatever VirtualBox or Proxmox series. Lots of attacks in there. Again, you just need to tack on the proxy chains-q and possibly TCP specific options with certain attacks. And again, a lot of my notes, if you go into my notes here or other notes too, not just my notes, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there with lots of notes about proxying Active Directory attacks through a SOCKS proxy, but you can just do proxy chains and a good handful of articles come up with example code of or example commands of sending certain attacks through a proxy. But yeah, that's the gist of it. I hope you all found the information informative, particularly the the pivoting, but more specifically the initial OSINT as well. Just taking the information. It's again about gathering information, using it, gathering more, using that information, gathering more until you find a way to get a foothold. That's the key point I want to drive home, is that gather your information, figure out how you can use it to gather more information, and then eventually get a foothold on the box. Once you get a foothold on the box, it becomes a lot easier to set up your pivot. Those are the key takeaways from today's lesson. Any questions?
You actually answered every question I had at the end, because it was all about proxying or tools through proxying.
Cool. Good. Glad that cleared the stuff out.
Anybody else with some questions? All right, well, go to sleep, local hostel.
Yeah, have a good
Pick
night.
you up.
Sleep well. You'll get domain admin in your dreams.
We don't want a grumpy hostile because you didn't get any sleep.
I added to my Etsy host file, I added the domain controller's fully qualified domain name, probably as well as some half the box entries. Yeah, just some half the box entries, but then this is what I added based on the article. This is the fully qualified domain name, the fully qualified domain name of the domain controller and its IP address.
Any more questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't want to cut anybody off. If you got something.
Good. I'm glad you found it informative. Thank you for oh, get it this. Yeah, I don't know, man. That's I don't feel like I'm very good at it, man, but I appreciate you saying that.
Because he doesn't sleep.
Oh man, I don't know. For other reasons, but
I probably sleep. I didn't think I slept a lot, but he probably sleeps just as much as me.
I don't sleep for other reasons. Not. I mean, I do probably spend a lot too much time in the lab, but
Yeah, caffeine and children probably.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Kind of like caffeine in the day, children at night. So,
I remember my
well,
my nights aren't that far behind me. I still remember.
yeah, man, we'll get there one of these days. But
You will. You will. All right.
any other questions for anybody?
It doesn't look like it, so I will wrap up, and the recording will be up as soon as I can get it up. All right. Have a
Well,
good
you
night,
know where to
everyone.
find me. Yeah, everybody have a great night, and you can always find me in the server if you have more questions.